wanted to thank our panelists and wanted to pay particular thanks to Nina Keck, who is going to serve as our moderator today. Nina is an award-winning journalist from Vermont Public Radio, and we're really honored to have you today, so thank you so much.
Thank you for that introduction. That's a beautiful dog. I was really intrigued when I heard about this conference and very much wanted to be part of it, so I was really excited when they asked me to moderate. It got me thinking about death. And I immediately thought about my dad, who had a great funeral. My dad had a really great funeral. He was a Dixieland jazz piano player, so his buddies played the hymns, rocked the church. He's a Marine Corps Honor Guard. They look really great in their dress blues. And to this day, 9 years later, my mother still has people come up and say, wow, John had a great funeral. The bummer part of it was the preceding 6 weeks, when he was in intensive care after a stroke, it was pretty awful. His death was not great. And my brother and my mother and I still kind of agonize about what we didn't know, what we didn't ask, coulda, shoulda, wouldas, all of those things. And so thinking about this panel discussion with the three of you, with all of your varied expertise, I thought it's going to be a very interesting conversation to hear all of your questions and to talk a bit about what can make death better, not only for the person who's going through it, but also for the folks that love that person or are close to that person or just want to help. So yeah, I was really looking forward to this. So the way this discussion I thought would work best is I'm going to chat with these panelists for a little bit to get the ball rolling, and then I will open the questions up to all of you, and we'll have a microphone to pass around for that. So first of all, let me introduce these wonderful panelists. With the dog, who you all saw, is Kimberly C. Paul. She is first and foremost a storyteller. She spent her early years working in the entertainment industry at Saturday Night Live, which is very intriguing, and later in daytime TV. But then she made a very unusual career change into hospice, which I think is really intriguing. She became vice president of marketing at a North Carolina hospice and says the stories she heard from over 2 decades there changed and enriched her life. And those stories led to her 2018 book, Bridging the Gap. Kimberly also hosts the podcast Death by Design, and she believes fiercely that death should be seen as a human experience and not as a medical event, a message that she's taken on the road with her national Live Well, Die Well tour. Please welcome Kimberly C. Paul. And her dog, Haven. Francesca Arnoldy has also made a career out of listening to people's stories and helping them voice their end-of-life wishes, and she's teaching others to follow suit. She is an end-of-life doula. Some of you may know or even do that who are in the audience, but I'll ask her to explain more about that term. She's also the course developer and program director for the University of Vermont College of Medicine's End-of-Life Doula Professional Certificate Program, and she's the author of Cultivating the Doula Heart, Essentials of Compassionate Care. Please welcome Francesca Arnoldy. And Dr. Bob Gramling is the Palliative Medicine Chair and a Professor of Family Medicine here at the University of Vermont. He's head of the Palliative Medicine Division at the UVM Medical Center. He and his team care for thousands of seriously ill people every year, so he's on the front lines. He also works with students and faculty on research to better understand and promote high-quality communication around serious illness. And along with his brother David, Dr. Gramling co-authored the book Palliative Care Conversations, Clinical and Linguistic Perspectives. So please welcome Dr. Bob Gramling. So I thought I'd start with the panelist that has the cool dog. I think we all understand that talking about death is really difficult for a lot of folks. And it's almost like bringing up money. You know, it almost seems a little impolite somehow to talk about death.
I think it's more like sex, but...
So I want to know why you felt that death was something worthy of a national tour. Why do you feel people are needing, maybe hungry to talk about death?
Well, I think the issue is that for so long we didn't want to talk about death. But as I'm finding, I'm on my 27th state, is that people just need permission. And for us to not turn away when they cry or laugh in the same moment. So really, I wanted to empower the individual to reclaim their own voice within life as well as death. And hopefully, by doing that, we could meet the medical community halfway so that we could actually have a conversation. I think the one thing that we're missing in the world, specifically for the United States, is that we're missing connection with individuals. And if you can't connect with an individual, then how can you talk about an intimate subject like death? So really the tour is about connection. And when we have connection, then I think we can really talk about what makes me happy every day and not that destination thinking that we humans tend to do, because there is no destination after death. But I will say this, a lot of people don't think death's just one moment, and a lot of people don't think the dying are still living. And so by engaging in conversations in every state, it's bringing me hope that connection is still alive and giving individuals permission to reclaim death from the medical community. So that's why I am so passionate about it, and because I lost the love of my life to cancer 20 years ago and still find that people have a hard time about talking about death and dying. Not necessarily individuals, but in the medical community. And so I think we consumers can teach them a lot.
And I have to follow up because I'm so intrigued how you went from the entertainment industry with Saturday Night Live and daytime TV. How did that segue? Was it the
That's
death
the normal career path, right? Right? I guess when you're still long enough in life, your life tends to find you. And a television show was on hiatus in Wilmington, North Carolina, and I thought I would just be a warm body and give back to a hospice program, and ended up going to volunteer and being just inundated with all these questions. And halfway through, I realized it was an actual job interview, not just a warm body needed, because they were asking for my resume and how much I wanted in the salary. And so when they said, do you want the job? I said, well, tell me more. And I thought a 5-month position in hospice would be cool, and I would go back to television. That 4 or 5 months became 17 years, because as a true storyteller, you go where the good stories are, and I found them at the bedside of the dying, who really were my greatest teachers about life.
Francesca, kind of stemming off that, I want to ask you how you got into your field, but first, just in case anybody is unclear, what is an end-of-life doula?
Sure. And a doula in general is a non-medical caregiver who provides informational, physical, and emotional support during major life transitions, such as birthing and dying. So beyond the birthing and dying, beyond the two moments, the doula's presence spans longer. So for a birth doula and end-of-life doulas, we interpret a lot of what birth doulas have developed for our work and translate it into end-of-life care. So for birth doulas, they're present during the pregnancy and helping a family to plan, prepare, and process leading up. Just as an end-of-life doula, during the time that a client is living up until death, we are there as a supportive presence to assist with planning, preparing, and processing. And then doulas are present during the active birthing, the active dying process. sometimes to varying degrees, and it kind of depends on the model of the doula care, whether it's a partnership or a solo doula, or if they're backup doulas, or it's a collective of doulas, if they are taking shifts or not. So there's some variation there, but there's presence during those major transitions, and then continued care after in the form of visiting and checking on the family's transition into their new normal. So for postpartum, how are you integrating this momentous change in your life? And how are you doing with this new being? And then for end-of-life doulas, a post-passage visit or a number of visits where you're checking on the loved ones of the client. And how are they doing in their initial grieving and their transition into this new normal?
The post-death care, the visiting and the staying connected with the family, that sounds unique. But in the lead-up services, how are you different? How are you not competing with hospice or overlapping, or how do you overlap or differ from hospice?
Great question, layered answer. And so this is because there are a number of pathways for doulas, and in our program, we welcome people from all walks and who have all different goals for coming through the program. So we welcome people who are already established in their field, maybe mental health workers, maybe medical care providers, music thanatologists, hospice volunteers, spiritual care providers. So many different people come through. So we really attend to their goals and try to meet their needs in whatever ways we can as a program, because we believe in this compassionate care model and its benefits for people. There are new approaches, new techniques, a different lens, a different take on things so that people can add to their toolboxes. So then for a private practice doula, our aim is to complement the care that's already there for each client. So whether it's palliative care, hospice care, and then within that client's specific natural network, who they have available to them, we're assessing what's available, what's in place, what might else be useful. We come with a directory list. That's part of our training program. We ask our doulas to do a lot of research in their own communities, so they're very well versed in what's available. And then we plug in as needed, and we kind of step in or we step back. And our specific tasks can look different from client to client. But some of our major offerings are in the realm of planning and preparing. We can do some processing with life reviews, and those can sometimes turn into legacy projects and gifts that people can leave behind to their loved ones. And also vigil planning wishes, so like birth wishes for a pregnant woman. So we can help for them to just imagine, and like what Kimberly talks about, designing your end of life, really personalizing, customizing. What's ideal? What's unacceptable? Where's our sense of flexibility? How can we be creative? That's how a doula can add in and help. And also, we have a pathway through hospice. So locally, we're really fortunate that we have this openness with our local hospice through UVM, in that we have created a doula role within their volunteer group. And it's fairly new, but we have a number of hospice volunteers locally who have also taken the doula training or a different doula training. And so if they're dually trained as a doula and a hospice volunteer, they can provide supportive service to the hospice patients as a volunteer doula. And this enables some of our graduates to have more experience before they might hang a shingle, but not all of our graduates plan to have a private practice and work as a doula.
Bob, as a family medicine physician, you specialize in palliative care, and I'd like you to just briefly explain what palliative care means and how it differs from other care a patient might receive in the hospital.
So we created a word that no one would understand, which is probably true, actually. So palliative care is, there are many definitions. The one I use is that Medicare has adopted, not because Medicare usually has the most prosaic approach to definitions, but this is patient and family-centered care that focuses on anticipating, preventing, and treating suffering. And how that differs from other, particularly medical specialties, is that we're the only one where suffering is our directive. It's not disease. And why that's important, I think, for some of our conversation today is that, for managing a disease, we may all have a little bit, our kidneys might work a little bit differently, but not a lot differently, and I'm going to be able as a physician to have some sense of how I should go about trying to help those, if they're, to help them continue to function, to help our bodies to try to live longer. But suffering is something that I imagine every one of us is going to define a little bit differently. And there's no probe for that. You know, I don't have something that I can stick under your tongue and after a couple of minutes say, aha, that's Bob's definition of suffering. And so what I get to do is I get to talk with people. I get to understand that. To the degree to which people invite me in and I invite them into conversation about what living means and whether talking about dying is something that we've been avoiding so much that that's actually adding to the experience of suffering and getting in the way of living. And how the things that we do to our kidneys or our hearts or our lungs or our legs, whatever, whether that's adding to or taking away from however we define suffering today. That's kind of what I guess.
That was a great definition. I'm just wondering how informed patients are about that kind of care. I know with my dad, when I think a social worker approached us and said, or one of the doctors said, we think it's time for palliative care, and I remember thinking, oh no, sort of that was the beginning of the end. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, oh, this could be really good for my dad, and I wish we would have been talking about this sooner. So how well informed are patients, and how do you try to communicate that?
So there's more, the grassroots attention and effort around palliative care is growing, and so societal awareness is higher. I think the resistance that you kind of referenced a little bit, Nina, in the, oh, we're not ready for them yet, so to speak, tends to come a little bit more from the medical community than the non-medical community, to be honest. And I think we sometimes thrust that upon patients and families that, oh, you're not ready for them yet, in a way that confers a little bit of expectation that just by talking to me means you're about to die. And so that adds some of the burden to the uncertainty and the inferences and the assumptions that we are going to make as patients when we're sick and vulnerable. So I think that probably the information needs are almost more on the medical side than the non-medical side.
Before I go back, Francesca, I'm very curious how you became a doula and how you chose. We heard from Kimberly how she sort of phased in the normal career progression from Saturday Night Live into hospice. But how did you become a doula? Why did that call to you?
So I assume you're referring to end-of-life doula or doula in general?
End of life.
Okay. Because
Although you said they're similar, but
Yeah.
more the end of life, and why you think others are called to it. But start
Sure.
out with yourself.
So I've been a birth worker for a decade now and have been attending births and supporting women and providing some postpartum care and teaching childbirth preparation classes, and still enjoy doing that somewhat, although this has really kind of taken over for me, and I'm so grateful for it because I have equal passion for both realms. But it's something that I had been interested in since attending my grandfather's death, and I hadn't experienced a lot of personal loss leading up to that, other than one aunt in my 20s, which she was so close to me. And I was involved in her dying, but my grandfather's death was different. I went with my mom and we arrived. He was receiving hospice care at home. My grandparents were both in their 80s at that time. My grandmother still is in her late 80s. And so she was exhausted when we arrived. Her anxiety had just been ramping up the closer he was getting to dying, and she was receiving care, but they were private people, and they didn't want a lot of others coming into the home. They had really kind of minimal visits, whatever was necessary, but she was providing round-the-clock, 24/7 care to him. So when my mom and I showed up, she just said, oh, thank goodness, I'm going to go sleep. And I said, okay. And I just sort of walked in, and I hadn't had any training, hadn't had a lot of personal experience, had no frame of reference, but just sort of wanted to be useful. So I stepped in, and I was his one-person vigil for that night. And he was in his active dying. He wasn't communicative. He was comfortable, it appeared, and he didn't seem to be in pain. And so I just cared for him, but in this way of holding space we talk about, and in just being a supportive presence, in silently often encouraging him with whatever he was working on, which seemed completely mysterious to me, but also something that needed to be honored. And the next morning, the rest of the family kind of came back together, and people were all at their stations. And as a doula, because it felt right to me in that moment, I was able to fill in where they weren't. And so my grandmother, she wanted to be fixing things for people, making drinks and snacks and hostessing. And that was her place of sort of safety and comfort in this really intense time. And my mom wanted to be kind of outside getting fresh air. And my other uncle wanted to be served by his mother, those things that she was fixing. And then another uncle wanted to be in his own home, and he wasn't comfortable being in the space at all. He hadn't visited in a couple weeks because it was just too much for him. So I was able to sort of step in so that they could feel like they had permission to just be where they needed to be and do what they wanted to do, but he was well attended to. And so that's what I do as a birth doula as well. It felt so similar, and it was so surprising to me because I went in with zero expectations, had no idea what to expect. And so then this wonderful opportunity came my way through UVM because I had been speaking to my friend Matt, who you heard from. He's a program developer, about potentially exploring some birth-related doula trainings for UVM, seeing if there was a market. And then this came along, and he said, "Are you interested?" And my heart just said, "Yes, I am very interested."
In that all of you have made a career out of helping people through these very difficult transitions. Bob, you and Francesca very intimately, and I don't know how much your hospice role, but I know you talk about the stories you heard and wanting to share those, being very empowered by those. And I'm wondering, part of maybe what makes that end-of-life period better is having someone to talk to and having somebody really listen. And Kimberly, I'm wondering if you could share some thoughts about how do you start that conversation? So many of us shy away from talking about it. What practical things do you tell people to do to sit down with their significant other or their whomever to start the conversation about death? And besides the loved one, how maybe I can talk to you, Bob, in a bit. How do you do that with a doctor? But how do you practically start that? Do you have any tips?
Tips. I have lots of tips. You know, the funny thing is, I think about my mortality every day. You know, I do, because when I know life is going to end, it makes me really live more boldly today. And I experienced a death of a boyfriend at 30. He was 30, I was 28. And so that conversation never evolved until, oh my gosh, melanoma came up and there was nothing we could do. I would say this, the more you laugh about your own mortality, the better. And I think that's maybe some of the Saturday Night Live coming out. But I do have a crazy family too. You know, but I feel like, how do we get a conversation that's meaningful around a table that doesn't have to be so hard? And I feel like, you know, especially in campgrounds, I'm in an RV going on this tour. In campgrounds, you know, I walk in with this wrapped RV with 29 death sponsors, except for, you know, my lovely Cabot Cheese, which is the top sponsor here locally. But people are like shocked, and they're like, "What are you doing?" And that's all they have to ask me. And then I come out with this excitement of wanting to change. And I feel like the more I talk about death, the more people change how they're living. And so it's an easy conversation when you're talking about today and living, and I'm not sick. So yeah, tips, I would say laugh. And don't be afraid of it. My family actually drew straws who was going to pull my plug. They all wanted to. No, just kidding. You know, it can be fun. And I will say this, recently I was with my parents in Richmond, Virginia, and my dad, I walked past and I saw a headstone with my father's name on it. And I'm like looking over at my dad mowing the church grass, and here's a headstone in the church cemetery with my father's name on it. And I was like, "Psst, come here." And I said, "What in the world? Is this yours?" And he goes, "Oh yeah, this is my grave." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, why do you have a headstone already on your grave?" And he said, "Well, I had that little scare a couple of years ago, and I thought I wanted to go ahead and plan everything." And I said, "Ben, kneel down. I got to take a picture of this, and we got to display this. We got to display this at your funeral because, this is sort of funny. But get this, one day I will bury my father there, and I hope that that little giggle that we shared at that very spot surfaces, because we had a connection. We've always had a close connection in life. Now we are starting to have a connection even in his death, even before he dies." And so I tend, because I have a crazy family, tend to look at all things sort of funny. And I think laughter really helps me embrace the uncomfortable.
I want to open up the discussion to all of you, and while you're thinking of questions, I was going to share a tip that I had for bringing up what I thought was a surprise end-of-life directive. My family, my husband's family and my own, would have these family reunions every year in northern Wisconsin, where I'm from. I'm from Wisconsin, and we were sitting on the deck with my husband's family and my family, having beers, enjoying a sunset, when my husband kind of shunted us off into siblings with parents on one side and the other siblings and their parents on the other, and end-of-life directives. And we're all having cocktails, and I thought, that was pretty brilliant, because we were all in a great mood, and he went through it all, and I remember thinking, this is a little twisted, but we laughed, and when my dad subsequently had a stroke, it really helped because we were on the same page. But that was just a tip that I had that I thought was pretty good of my husband. But I wanted to make sure you all had time to ask questions. And are there any questions from any of you? Any doulas in the room? End-of-life doulas, yeah? Do you have questions about that or any stories to share? Oh, come on, don't be shy.
No questions are off limits. All right?
To Kimberly.
No, to Kimberly.
I'm not a doula, but is a general question okay? Okay. It has to do with the concept of control, because that comes up a lot. I've done a lot of end-of-life planning and a lot of very specific planning about my own end-of-life transition. And I realized that a lot of the plan I have has a lot to do with me being pretty conscious about things, even like right up to the end, when all of my details are laid out exactly as I want them to be. And then, of course, when I think about it more clearly, I realize that there is things like dementia and loss of control, and you're not really what you are now, what you might be then. And so I'm wondering, in situations that you've run in, specifically Francesca, when you run into situations where there are relatively clear instructions from the dying person. My instructions are pretty clear, but I'm not going to be there to enforce them. And then there are family. I've got family. I've talked to everybody, but I'm worried still because of my control issues that I'm working on about when the end comes, it's not going to go the way I want it to go. And that last piece of the puzzle, that last transition is very important to me. So any advice or reflections you have on that control question?
I would say, I hear you. I feel you. But that's not the doula way. It's not about me, it's about you. I also struggle with these things too, though. If I were working with you as your doula, I would want to hear a lot more about that now. I would want to hear about those fears. I would want to hear about the anxieties. I would want to hear about the variations of the plan that would be most upsetting to you, and how you would feel like you weren't being honored as who you are at your core, who you know to be at that point, and what those specific concerns are. And then ideally, be able to have more conversations with your family about those, especially with your healthcare agent or proxy that you've decided, because that's when that person steps in. And that person's job is to honor your wishes in the best ways possible, even though there are unexpecteds and we need to be flexible with what's coming up. And do you truly trust that person to do that? And to speak as you instead of for you in those moments, it's really important. So in terms of preparation, that's what I could offer. And then if there were specifics, I would likely connect you with your healthcare team and other people who could be helpful about, treatment options or things that would or would not be available to you. And in the case of dementia, there are plans that we can make ahead of time. If your hope is to perhaps die a more natural death and not have things prolonged unnecessarily, there are definitely things you can put in your advance directives that specify that. But that's just making assumptions. That's, one potential pathway for people.
Yes, hold that thought.
I think it's important to remind everybody that when you have advance directives and you have a person who has the responsibility for carrying those out, the law requires that that be done. So I totally agree with you. And they're supported by law in the state of Vermont. That's not true in all states, but it is in Vermont.
Bob Gramling, I'll get to your question in just a second. I want to follow up a little bit on the gentleman's question who had everything mapped out. How do you handle families in hospital situations where it hasn't been as well mapped out and emotions are running high, people are feeling overwhelmed, doctors and nurses are rushing around, maybe diagnoses are very confusing and frightening? How do you help families and individuals have constructive conversations in those situations?
So I think one of the things that in the acknowledging that most of what we're talking about is the unimaginable, the stuff that happens when people are sick and that can happen in hospitals and that can happen near end of life are not always the things you're thinking about ahead of time. And it's pretty hard to make all of these decisions in anticipation, unless you say, under no circumstances do I ever want to go back to the hospital. Well, that's one type of decision you can do that is pretty ahead of time. Short of that, the most important things, and this is one of the bigger interventions that we as a really public health community are doing for our clinicians in our area under a program called Talk Vermont, is try to change a little of the conversation from, do you want me to push on your chest when you die, which really feels kind of silly to a person, like, really? Is that what we were talking about? To what matters to you? Do you feel like you have enough information about what's happening to you? What are you worried about? What are some of your fears? And what does good enough look like? Meaning, what are some critical abilities that if you didn't have those, or if that was not something that your doctors and nurses thought was feasible from the interventions at hand, that you wouldn't want us to try having your body live longer? And so changing the conversation a little bit to making sure the people around you who are going to have to speak for you, as Francesca appropriately said, that they have a good way to answer some of those questions. For Bob, if he's able to laugh, if he's able to be a dad in the way that he defines being a dad, if he can still pretend he's an athlete, even though that's fading fast, then okay, then that is going to be good enough. And here's how he defines what those things look like. And so when those conversations, a lot of people feel like, oh my gosh, we didn't talk about my advance directives or didn't get that filled out. However, along the way, a lot of people have gathered that other type of information from their family member. And so when we're with families who haven't necessarily laid out a plan as clearly as they would have hoped, you really work hard to find that patient's voice the way it had been expressed throughout their life. What did good look like for your dad, your son, your daughter, your loved one, your friend? And navigate a little bit about what do we really think we have to offer, and what does success look like from the medical therapy perspective, and is that in the ballpark for what this person would define as good? And that's some of the way we will get at some of those types of questions. Was that sufficient answer for?
I thought that was a great answer. It sounds like there's a lot of shades of gray, and they're very personal, and you need to really kind of peel away. I wanted to make sure I get to your question, Matt. This gal up here. Oh, you got it. You're all set.
About advanced directives, while they're a singular document and really important to create and preserve, they can be changed. And I feel like there's a real process for me personally as I age and grow and expand and learn. My feelings about what I want change. So what's really important to me is to have the document, but more importantly is to have the conversation with someone that I really trust and that really knows me well enough to know if I died suddenly tomorrow, to know what I would want. And interestingly enough, I've been a hospice volunteer for many decades, and I've been a No One Dies Alone volunteer in the hospital, sitting vigil with people who are dying. And I always thought the ultimate was to have someone sitting with you. And this is my quasi-tip. I thought that that was the ultimate, and certainly what I do very passionately for others myself. Until my son, who's 36, and involved in healthcare policy, said to me, "That sounds good, Mom, but I need to tell you right now that I feel like dying is my own job, and I need some time at the end by myself to do my job." So it was like, whoa, we parents are always learning from our kids, aren't we? But it was a wonderful lesson for me to hear that, to know that my way isn't always the highway, and to be open, just to be open.
And it's kind of like what they said. I think Francesca said, "I hear you." One of your key jobs is to be able to say, "I hear you. I understand what you want in the situation." I'm curious. We hedge away from talking about death, and I wonder if any of you have thoughts, since you've been dealing with it, as to why. Are we afraid of it? And if so, what are we afraid of? I don't know. Kimberly, do you, from your tour, have people expressed to you why they are just so uncomfortable?
Well, I think as human beings, we're destination thinkers. I'll get out of high school and I'm going to be happy. I'll get out of college and I'm going to be happy. When I get out of med school, I'm going to be happy. When I have a marriage and children, I'm going to be happy. And then, in our brilliant 40s and 50s, we have this thing called midlife crisis because that thinking doesn't work. And I feel like sometimes, like the good doctor here said, it's unimaginable. And how do we think about something that's unimaginable? But I say this, I think for me, the more I think about it, I have control. Because, I am driving a 29-foot RV hauling a Mazda behind me, and I have my advanced care planning done. We redid it prior to the trip because my life most likely possibly could end because I'm not a good driver even in a car. But it was really important for me to sit down my people to talk about them if something would happen to me on the road. And how do we do that? And even to the point that I'm like, what if I die in Wisconsin? How would you get my body back? In having these conversations, not because I want them to know, I want to know, even though I wouldn't care, but I still want to know. Like, how would you do that? So I really feel that it's been taboo for a long time, yet if I think about my grandmother, who did not want to die with hospice and at home because they had funerals at the farmhouse, and they displayed the body for days in the farmhouse. And I feel like, are we cycling back to that? Is life a true cycle? I don't know. So those are some of the things that I think people have issues with talking about their mortality. But I also feel like sometimes it's really scary when you're not fully living and you're actually living. I think the tragedy is not death, but what dies every day while we're breathing. And I feel like sometimes when we get a serious illness, it wakes us up that our time is limited, but our time is limited right now. But that's just the slap in the face. And so suddenly you start living because you have a serious illness. And oh my God, I thank God for cancer, because I would have never have lived or made these decisions because of this diagnosis. Those are some of the things that I've experienced on the road. I don't know if you guys have any other comments.
How about you? Actually, let me ask you both this, because I'm wondering, you've worked with a lot. Francesca, let me go to you next. Just as far as fear factor, what have you learned in talking to many people going through their own deaths? What seems to be the big hurdle that maybe you can help them overcome, or you've seen people sort of overcome and suddenly think, oh, okay.
Could I give that one to Bob and take the other one?
I didn't know there was rules. I didn't know we could pass.
Can I switch? Because my mind was just turning when you were talking about just culturally. Either. I already changed things, so. Okay.
You want.
Okay. Thank you for your flexibility. So I've been just tossing around some ideas in my mind about this, about why are we scared? Where does this anxiety come from? What is this reluctance to face our mortality? And I feel really similarly as Kimberly, as she explained, that the more it's sort of on your mind or in the back of your mind, it really encourages you to live more fully and with more presence and more intentionality. And you're really thinking about, is this the best way to spend this moment, this day? Do I feel good about the interactions I'm having right now? And that way you don't have to carry around this baggage of regret, ideally, is the hope and the feeling of that. And so I'm thinking about it, and why is this happening? And I think it's a little bit of entitlement. And it's more expansive than what it sounds like, but I think often we kind of go through our days, we go through our lives, and we feel entitled to all life has to offer, and a sense of control and a sense of predictability. And then when things don't go our way, we feel really victimized, or at best inconvenienced. So just like a mundane example would be, do you appreciate every day that your vehicle gets you to where you want to go? Right? Do you think about that? Is that on your mind? Do you thank your car when you park in your spot and you head off to work? Probably not. But the one day your car doesn't work well for you and it breaks down or you get a flat tire, it's a disaster. And it's something that you hadn't anticipated, you hadn't thought about, you hadn't planned for, and you feel terribly inconvenienced and potentially victimized by life. And I think that's what happens on a larger scale about our mortality. We're avoiding it.
That's great. That's really great.
So that's just been bouncing around, so I needed to get it out.
That's a great balance.
So Bob, the question that I want, you can answer that one. Well, no, I just was wondering how you deal, what you find when you're dealing with people in the hospital. Are they afraid? And if so, what are they afraid of? What are people's biggest concerns surrounding?
Well, I certainly fear, yes. I mean, the fear of dying, for centuries has been a philosophical and other existentialist sort of science. And I think our awareness, or even Irvin Yalom would, as an existential psychotherapist, would say that our self-awareness is one of the beauties of being human. It's also one of the burdens of knowing that we won't always be alive, at least in the way that we think of what living is now. And when I see people in the hospital, I think of two areas of suffering that are related to your question about fear. One is the fear itself, and then the loneliness around that fear. Is that, yes, this may be scary, the uncertainty, what's going on. What are people not talking about? What is happening to me? And I think in one aspect of with my job is just letting people know that I'm present. I'm not going to run for the door when someone cries or when someone says they're afraid, or asks me, how long am I going to live, Doc? I'm going to be there, and I'm going to be curious, and I'm going to bring that curiosity with me. And I'll be inviting to how far you want to go in this conversation. I'm with you. We'll follow this through. And in some ways, that elephant is a lot scarier when you don't talk about it or name it. The things that people are afraid of are sometimes the more functional aspects of dying. Do I have to die feeling like I can't get any air? Is that my only option in front of me? That's an easy one to hit. Like, if no one's talking about it, it's like, no, we can take care of that. We can really do a good job of that. Here's how that looks like. What else? And
So just getting it out there. Getting the concerns out there and addressed, kind of like I saw your TED Talk where you had this blow-up elephant and... Yeah, but it just sounds like that's a big part
With a
of
tie.
it. Just getting those fears out there and having somebody say, well, let's talk about that. Let's take those down piece by piece. I mean, maybe it's not that simple, but maybe it is.
Can I add that I think it takes a lot of courage, too, and I've seen Bob do his work, and we are able to incorporate some of his teachings in our course, which is beautiful. And in that, it takes so much courage because you don't have all the answers to offer. You can't fix it. You can't rescue someone from that situation. You can sit with someone. You can hear them out. You can hold their hand. You can't offer all the answers to the unanswerable.
Yes.
Thank you. So I'm a pretty passionate hospice volunteer. I do about 100 hours a month of hospice volunteering. And I think that it's a privilege, and I learn a tremendous amount. And speaking to the way that our society looks at that, sometimes I will tell friends, yes, what are you doing now? Well, I do a lot of hospice volunteering. And they'll say, oh, God, that must be so hard. And it must be so hard to be with people who are dying. And my answer to that, and it's not intended to be glib, it's really honest, is I'm dying too. You're dying too. The only difference between me and my hospice client is that my death date is more ambiguous than yours, but I have one. And so if I can ground myself in the fact that we're actually in a shared situation, you just have a little bit less ambiguity and a little bit less time, presumably, I don't know, than I do, then I can move to the next piece of it, which is that until the moment that you die, it is about quality of life. And I mean, one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about hospice is because as a volunteer, that's where I get to step in, and as a doula as well. So yes, it's about comfort and it's about a lot of other things, but it's about what makes every moment quality until, presumably, at least in this realm, there are no more moments.
I love that. There's nothing stronger than the heart of a volunteer. I love that passion. And I tell you, because of you and the many hospice volunteers out there, you're keeping Dame Cicely Saunders' vision of what hospice truly was meant to be alive. And I hope this death doula movement is going to times that by 200. So thank you so much for sharing that story.
I'm kind of skipping back to the previous question about the fear, about talking about it. And I'm really curious about why is the medical community so afraid to talk to us about it when we're sick, when we need them to talk to us? What is it that is keeping them from realizing that we are going to die, we are dying, we're close, and not everyone, unfortunately, is like you, Dr. Gramling, and I appreciate your point of view and what you do for your patients. But what is the fear? Where is that coming from, and how can we?
You're saying the
change that?
fear that
Medical community, medical
shy
practitioners.
away from it. Yeah,
why is that not why are they so afraid to address it?
Yeah, let them pick that up.
Well, thank you. And I also would like to say you really wouldn't want me doing your abdominal surgery on you. So it's a nice, thanks for the comment, but there are some things I do well and some things I'm really, really bad at. I think that, there's been some very accomplished sociologists, behavioral economists who have been addressing these types of questions. How did modern healthcare get where it is now? This didn't just suddenly happen. We've had an example is in the late 1800s. One of our main medical textbooks had as much time dedicated to prognosis and diagnosis and therapy for things like pneumonia, and that steadily eroded over the subsequent decades, so that now medical students get a lot on diagnosis and treatment and nothing on prognosis. It's just vanished. In that same period of time, we have done a lot of marketing of ourselves that we can, we're going to be better than Google at promoting immortality. We're almost there, right? And we've been incentivized to do that. We're incentivized to, I mean this sounds like malice or purposeful. It's not, but fundamentally we're incentivized to do things. Do more tests, do more procedures. That's just what our whole system has built. And you can't walk through an airport that says, our hospital is going to cure suffering. That doesn't sell, right? But they all say we're going to cure, anything. So being a physician in that environment, it's not only the fear of death and that maybe we haven't dealt with the same, there's some pretty depthy shame in it, is I can't stop this from happening. I don't know what to do now. Maybe not in the conscious way, but in this isn't what we've built our whole system to acknowledge is happening. And so thankfully, I think that's changing. I think it's going to take a few generations for that to change, and then we'll get back to where we can bear witness to things at the same time trying to stop them. But it's deep for us, and we're superstitious too. We even use the words, anyone here ever say, my doctor, well, maybe not this, but my doctor gave X person a prognosis of a few months, and I beat that or didn't beat it. Well, just look at the verb. I didn't give somebody anything, right? That was happening. And so the power doesn't rest with me to say how long someone's going to live or not. But I would like to have the freedom to be able to share what I've been trained to see happening. And so if there's anything I can suggest is be kind with your physicians and say, I'd really like to know this information. And I'm not going to get really angry at you if you're wrong. But I'd love to know what you're thinking. Does that kind of get a little bit of...
Can I add one
Question.
thing?
Yeah, Francesca.
So I was able to attend one of the trainings that Bob had mentioned earlier, which is Vital Talk Vermont? No.
Or Talk Vermont.
Talk Vermont, based off of Vital Talk, the national mission. And it was wonderful. And so I was within a group of mostly medical people. And so they have these tip charts and things that you can look at, and then these scenarios with these fabulous actors that come in and they present themselves and they talk about their condition and they ask their questions. And we practice. We get in the hot seat. The seat of opportunity. And we practice. And to see, this is hard for everyone. It's just difficult. It's a difficult realm. To see these medical people who are brilliant in their fields tiptoe up to the seat of opportunity with so many nerves. And I think what I could witness is that a lot of that comes from they really want what's best for the person in front of them and the patient. They don't want to say the wrong thing. They don't want to make it worse. They don't want to upset the person further. And they are also a little bit scared of those questions that are going to come back at them when they open up those conversations. And then what do I do? What do I do from there? How do we keep going in this conversation? So it's a wonderful effort, and it just really softened my heart a lot to these medical people. They are human, and they are struggling with all these same issues that we all are, and it's difficult. It really is.
Wrap it up at 6 o'clock, and I wanted to give our panelists just to hear a couple of just very final thoughts, and also to give a plug for their books. I think they have all copies. Do you all have copies of your books? Yes, and so I think if you want to hear more, you can talk to them after this discussion. Dr. Bob Gramling's book is Palliative Care Conversations, Clinical and Linguistic Perspectives. Francesca Arnoldy's book is Cultivating the Doula Heart, Essentials of Compassionate Care. And Kimberly C. Paul's book is Bridging the Gap. And what's your next stop on your national tour? I love this national tour.
Yeah, I leave Vermont the 26th, and I'm going to upstate New York. And then I'm headed to Wisconsin, and then Minnesota. So I can go right down to where I'm going to be in December, because I'm going to be in Las Vegas for Christmas. So any place warm. And I love Vermont, but you guys have snow.
Well, I want to thank all three of you for sharing your thoughts. The hour went really fast. I bet if some of you have some last-minute questions, you might be able to grab them on your way out. But thank you very much all for coming, and great questions, great thoughts, and thanks to all of you.
Yeah,
It's
you're
been
welcome.
great.
I'm very impressed that you guys are talking.
Thank you, Haven.
Haven says yay.
You're the dog, he's leaving.
She gets up to take her out, right?
Yeah.